Hello, everyone. This week's topic is about learners with intellectual and developmental disabilities, oftentimes used with the acronym IDD. I like talking about this topic because actually it was my major when I was a special education student. I trained to work with students who had moderate to severe disabilities. So I always enjoy anytime I can get back into this literature and think about many of the things that I believe are important for you to know to be effective as a teacher with this population of students. As you know from reading the chapter, there's quite a long history of service to people with developmental disabilities, primarily those with cognitive disabilities. It goes back to Europe and then in the United States. There are lots of things that occurred that undergird really how we feel about special needs, or people with special needs, and in particular those with moderate to severe disabilities, including one thing that you may or may not have read about called the eugenics movement, which started in the US in the early 1900s. And it was in that time frame that people felt like we could eradicate all kinds of things, but in this case, disabilities, by basically taking the gene pool and cleaning it up, much like Nazi Germany. Okay, the idea there was that if they would exterminate the Jews, there would be no more Jews, and they had all kinds of reasons why they felt that that was a necessary thing to do. Of course, they were crazy reasons, and they made no sense, and neither did the eugenics movement really. The idea again was that we could rid the earth of something that we found distasteful or something that was an obstacle to our cultural survival, our cultural thriving. And it was in those movements that we still have a lot of leftover feelings about people with disabilities being broken, needing to be isolated, being a shame to a family, a shame to a community. And again, that depends often on where you live, whether it's in the United States or outside of the United States, how a person with a disability might be received. But it's important to understand that in this history, we have a lot of prejudice that still continues. I'll give you one that really drives me crazy. It's when you go to a school with adults, let's say, who have developmental disabilities. And this has happened to me a few times where I walk to the bathroom where the students go to the bathroom, and I'll hear a teacher say, "Ooh, ugh," like that's that. Go to the staff bathroom. Don't go to that bathroom. And I think, I wonder why. When I go to a high school to consult or an elementary school, um, I'm sure they may have a teacher's bathroom somewhere just, for privacy and convenience, but no one ever says to me, "Oh, don't go into that bathroom," as if something's wrong with it. And that is just a simple example of how people make the assumption that a person with developmental disabilities, particularly what we used to call mental retardation, and I may throw that word in every now and again, even though it's not the preferred term anymore because I trained with that language. And so sometimes I drop it, and I hope you understand that it was really the words, those were considered polite or respectful terms back in that time. But the reason I brought the words up again is because the idea that, and I put it in quotes, that retarded people are dirty, they have germs, they're messy, they don't take care of themselves. In other words, it's like we don't want to go into that funky bathroom because you know who has been in there. It's a simple example, but it's one that I think is important for us to think about, which is why do we immediately jump to conclusions about people who have significant disabilities that are untrue and unfair? So I hope that you'll give some thought to the kinds of things that make up the background, the history, the foundation of serving students in this disability area, because it's really been a very complicated, complex history that led us to where we are today. I can tell you, as somebody who's been in the field for a long time, I am just shocked that we practice inclusion as if it were always, or if it had always, I'm sorry, been a right for students to expect. When I first started, all students were segregated. Even if you were in a regular education setting, there was no real integration of students unless it happened during what we call the specials. Other than that, it just did not occur. And I'm working in a high school now where a student with autism who came in last year, very challenging behavior, threw himself on the floor, threw things, pounded desks, used very um, choice language. He used a lot of swearing, but he also would drop the N word every now and then. And he got really upset for some reason when he heard people speaking Spanish. And these were really compromising behaviors. After a year of working on that, or I guess a year and a half, he is now included in two general education classrooms where he's doing quite well. And it is the hope of the team that next year he'll be fully included in the general curriculum. That's astounding to me. It's also really makes me happy because we have spent a long time, people like me in the field, trying to push the field toward this kind of inclusion and integration of people, both in the school setting and in their community settings as well. So there's a bit of, in the prompts I gave you for the your activity for tonight, the assignment for tonight, there's a bit of question or my inquiry for you to think about um, what some of these things mean, like whether the terminology matters or whether it's important or not that we use certain strategies and why is that important. So I hope that from that exercise you will take with you some new ideas about and values, hopefully, about serving people with intellectual disabilities and developmental disabilities. A few things that I wanted to mention that I think are really important from my experience in working with schools. And here's what they are. The first one is I opened up a bit about, in the beginning, a bit about bathrooms and dirty and those things that are highly unfair and inaccurate. But the opposite side of that is treating with people with special needs as if they're, God's little children, God's little angels. They're just so cutesy cutesy and they need to be babied and pampered and that kind of thing. And I still see it. I still see it. I'll give you an example, and I hope it doesn't offend anyone. But I went to a graduation a couple of years ago, and one of the students who was graduating had Down syndrome, and she had done quite a bit of work. She was a very bright young woman, and she had done a lot of work on bringing people together, like in a buddies program and some other things. And it was impressive. And so she was one of the student speakers that talked about those initiatives. However, there were probably two or three other students who spoke, and they were equally as good, both in their presentation and the kinds of things they had done at the school. When they finished, those students, they got a nice round of applause. It was great. When the young woman with Down syndrome finished speaking, the whole place erupted. People were standing up, hooping and hollering and, crazy. Okay. Now, you might think I'm an old curmudgeon, but the first thing I thought was, she's only getting this applause because she has Down syndrome. Other people were just as good, and it was like, yay. When she spoke, you could tell people were just so moved because she had Down syndrome, and so moved because a person with a disability stood up and took part in a ceremony like other students. I hope I'm not offending you. What I'm saying is, we tend to give sort of special treatment to special students who have special needs. We use the word special a lot. And to a degree, I think it's fantastic that a young woman would achieve at the level she has and receive that kind of feedback. But on the other hand, I kept thinking, why is it that when a person with developmental disabilities achieves something, we have to make it so extra special that in a sense we go back to that idea of the little angel, the little baby, the little cutie. And it's really important that we get past that. because people with developmental disabilities live their lives in the world just like the rest of us. And so they're not going to always have people who treat them in the way that some might think is important, by giving them rewards, or by overemphasizing the things they do well, or by forgiving them, or excusing them from the kinds of rules and responsibilities that everyone else has. So I challenge you. I challenge you to think about people with developmental and intellectual disabilities as being like everyone else, except they're limited. They're limited in getting there. They have obstacles, obviously, in getting there. And so it's important for us, I think, that to fully embrace the way that we would treat someone with a developmental intellectual disability, that we first think of the person first. That's why we use people first language. People first language meaning like Mark, who has autism, not autistic Mark. The reason we use that language is because we always want to remember that the person comes first. One of the articles that's purely for reference, but I put on D2L, is about sexuality and disability. And one of the reasons I included that is because I wanted you to just look at one issue that has been very troubling for people who support those with developmental disabilities who want to express their sexuality. It's a big issue for families. It meets up against all kinds of opposition, and it really shouldn't, but it does. And I think part of that goes back to when we treat people who have disabilities like they are so special, sex seems dirty all of a sudden, or like they couldn't make a decision to want to do that, or that's only for certain people who are fill in the blank, whatever it is. There's all kinds of reasons that people oppose people with, moderate to severe disabilities engaging in relationships with one another, specifically sexual relationships. So I just put that there for you to look at it. I think you might find it kind of interesting. I thought the last story in that reading was particularly poignant. I don't cry easy, but got a little tear on that one because it was a really powerful story. So I am about putting people first, and I am about reducing this notion that we're dealing with people who are fragile, can break easily, who can't experience disappointment, who we should feel bad if they get angry or sad. Those are the things I hope that I'll help you scoop off your plate, and that you will begin dealing with students with special needs in general, but in this case, students with moderate to severe disabilities from the standpoint that we all wish to be treated, which is I am Mark Melton, and then I have this thing, right? So we want to put this thing to the side in a sense when we view people. But when we pull this thing called developmental or intellectual disabilities back into the picture, we're looking at it, I hope, not from a deficit model, but we're looking at it from a strength model. Here's what I mean by that. We want to take the strengths that a person has, build upon those so that they can find success and achieve with their own abilities with as minimal support as possible. So when I think of it this way, it's important that we distinguish between services and supports. Services are things like physical therapy, occupational therapy, social work. Those are services. Okay? Supports are when we put into place things that are environmental, things that are familial. By that I mean family, community. It's putting in the right people and the right pieces of the environment together to build the support that a person needs to be independent. An example of that might just be a card that goes into a student's pocket that has three colors on it: red, purple, yellow. And so when the purple is first, then you take the purple train down to Howard, and then you get on the red train. And you take the red train down to, let's say, Belmont. Then you forget you were supposed to go. I had to make this up as I went because I realized I did it wrong. You get the point. So when you get the red mark, you know to get to a red line train. Then you take that back north to Howard. That's where you catch yellow. That's when I messed up. That's where you catch yellow. So I've done travel training for people, and sometimes that's all it took. So they have a card that's laminated that's in their pocket. They can pull it out and see which color train that they go on first. That's a support. What I mean by that is it's something that it's a little it's a prop. It's a little prop up. It's a little, you need just a little bit of this or a little bit of that. It's no different than, for example, us using a GPS on the car. We may have a general idea where we're going, we could figure it out, but this makes it easier. So, what we're attempting to do in making things easier is to help people internalize the behaviors that they need to be successful on their own. So, hopefully, that card won't be necessary, but if it is not obtrusive. People wouldn't look at it and think anything less of the person. So it's not like a big chart or something that they would see. It's something that is typical and fits in to the person's life, and the use of the prop or the support, it fits into the person's life in a way that doesn't detract from them or increase any kind of social devaluation, meaning that you see something and it makes the person look like they are incapable. A card wouldn't do that. There are so many examples I could give you of how we would do supports. And as you get through your program here, you're going to learn more about that. You'll learn more about how we provide supports for people to be able to succeed. Some things that I want you to think about in terms of that. There were some things that were in the in the textbook that I wanted just to point out quickly. One is working memory. That is a huge issue to think about. The best way I know to describe working memory is the way your computer is when you put something on the computer and you minimize a window. When you minimize the window, it goes away, but it's still running. So the computer is still over here knowing what it's doing, right? But you're actually looking at something else. So it's like you have two things going at once and you can go back and forth. In a sense, that's what working memory is. So if I have working memory and we're talking about math, and I have this concept here that I'm using, and then you introduce a new concept, I can then hear the new concept, hold this in my memory while I integrate this. Okay? For many people with developmental disabilities, working memory is very, very poor. It's one of the reasons that we talk about systematic instruction, direct teaching, because oftentimes when things become more complicated, as in terms of holding something here and then adding something here while this stays going, that's really tough. It's even tough for a lot of people without any kinds of diagnosed conditions. So it's one that I want you to think about with this population in particular because working memory is absolutely essential to our survival. It's one of the ways that we're able to manage more than one thing at a time. And that has to be taught. And the only way I've learned to teach it is just to literally stay with the idea. So, for example, I'll use simple math, like if I said 2 plus 2 equals 4, right? And then I say something like, we're going to add 1. I would do something like this. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Remember that. Let's say it again. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Let's say it again. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Let's say it again. Plus 1. What do we have over here? 2 plus 2 equals 4. Plus 1. I'm not sure that's a good example. I'm just trying to show you how, in a way, I verbally try to hold the working memory and just sort of keep the working memory going. And what I found best is that when I exercise that part of the brain, students seem to be able to do it more successfully on their own, although it's still a challenge and will always be most likely a significant challenge. Another one that I wanted to talk about was metacognition. Metacognition, I describe simply this way. It's thinking about your thinking. It's thinking about what you've done before. It's thinking about how things worked out before. It's thinking about how you might want to try something this way or that way. We go into our head and we think about the things that we want to do, need to do, have done. So we may be evaluating those. But in a sense, it's like if this is your brain working, you have this other thing up here, like a camera, that's looking at your brain and reading it at the same time. So when you're thinking about that with students, you want to help them think about moving up into their brain and saying, think about what happens when this happens. So, for example, when you throw the ball at somebody at the recess time and hit them in a mean way, bad way, or something like that, you get in trouble. Tell me what your brain thinks. I get in trouble. That's right. So making the ball go this way in a friendly way means I don't get in trouble. I don't get in trouble. You're thinking about action down here. Again, I'm not sure that's a really good example of it, but the best way that I've ever thought of it is that we are like pulling a camera back and forth, as I said a minute ago, so that we can look at the bigger picture. That's what we all do when we think about our thinking. Like, am I really a good student and why? Um, you know, is this a successful marriage or not? Oftentimes, that's metacognition. We think about it from a higher level. And many people with disabilities have a very hard time doing that. Sorry, I'm turning the page for a second. Um, I also wanted to comment on some of the challenges and notions that come along with metacognition. One of the ways that we want to think about evaluating metacognition is to think about how students move out of a singular action, right? Walking over to the door, opening it, going to the bathroom without permission. They just go, right? And then walking to the door and then turning and saying, "Oh, Mr. Mark, may I go to the bathroom?" We want to think about how we're looking at people's thinking to see if it's in the moment thinking, go to the bathroom, or if it's inclusive of thinking about our thinking and what should come next. It's just an example of that. And I think I was looking back, I think the text has a pretty nice definition um, of what metacognition is, and I hope just those few examples might help a little bit with that as well. But it's very much a worthwhile topic to investigate and to learn more about, so that you're able to um, better assess that when you see it in students and know where you need to intervene to keep scaffolding their thinking up to where metacognition is a possibility. Um, Also, the text talks about gullibility, and I asked a question about that, a pretty simple question about gullibility. It is a big issue. One thing that comes along with putting students with significant disabilities around students who are not disabled is they may get involved in things, like let's say it's in a high school setting, that they don't realize are dangerous to them or others or might get them in trouble. I'll give you an example. I had a student with developmental disabilities, and he got to be buddy buddy with this guy who we all knew was kind of a druggie. But this guy was really a nice guy. I mean, he sold drugs, but that didn't mean he wasn't nice. And he was really, really helpful to this kid, and this kid just took after him. We thought how great that was. And then one day, the boy's walking down the kid with the disability is walking down the hallway. Um, I didn't tell you I was an assistant principal in this setting, so I had to make all the discipline decisions. And as he was walking down, I see a bag of marijuana fall out of his pocket, and I'm thinking, this kid wouldn't have marijuana. I knew his family. I couldn't say they didn't smoke marijuana, but I kind of doubted it, and I thought it had to be the other kid. And as nice as that guy was to this student with a disability, he talked him into running drugs. So the person with a disability would deliver the drugs to somebody, and this guy would give him something, a dollar, candy. I don't know what he gave him, but it was so exciting for the student with disabilities because he felt like he was doing something for his friend, with his friend. He was getting paid for it in some way or other. You get the point. The thing was, it was such a delightful interaction for this child, but he had no clue that according to Virginia law, which is where I was working then, having drugs on campus meant a automatic 10-day suspension and a recommendation for expulsion from the schools. So, needless to say, you probably haven't talked about manifestation determination yet, but that's a concept, unless that was covered in the first chapter. I'm sorry, I don't remember. But anyway, manifestation determination basically means that if we can um, uh, we can prove that a person's disability actually was a causative factor of the action that took place, then we don't have to abide by typical discipline procedures. And it was very easy. I went to the school board with the student, and it was very clear the student was absolutely naive and unaware of what he was doing, so it didn't cause him any problems. But it could have, and you can imagine other ways in which people can be vulnerable. So I just want you to think about that area as well, because one of the things that parents worry about when we want to press forward and have their children become more and more independent is that they will be taken advantage of. So be thinking about that when you in your career, if you work with students like this, how do we prepare them as best we can to not be taken advantage of, and also how can we work with parents to help relieve some of their anxieties about it, and to have a shared agreement about what it is that we're going to do together, that is comfortable for everyone, that hopefully mitigates this gullibility issue, but it is an issue. One of the last things I want to talk about is generalization, and that is just huge. People with disabilities have a very hard time generalizing information. And I probably should clarify that and say people with intellectual disabilities more importantly, because generalization is a problem in other areas, but it probably is more important in this area than any other. This category, I mean, than any other, because generalization is something that requires us to use abstract thinking. Okay? So this is kind of another silly example, but just let me use it. You teach a student to use a soda machine, and they need to put in 4 quarters to get a soda, and they push the one that looks like the one that they want. So they want a Coca Cola, they match it with that, they put the 4 quarters in, push the Coca Cola button, right? You send this person to get a soda in another environment, and there it takes credit cards, or you can put $1 in the machine. They may be trying to put quarters in the dollar place. They may be trying to take, let's see, they might try to take the dollar, right, and put it next to where the choices that they're going to make. I was trying to think of somebody in particular, and he kept doing this. We took him to train him on another machine, and this is a long time ago. The dollar thing was brand new. Before that, it was always coins. And when he couldn't figure out how to use the dollar, he kept putting it next to the product. Like if he pushed it on the product, it would come out. Here's the point. For most of us, like I remember when the dollar things came out too, and I didn't know what they were. I hadn't seen them, like, what is that, right? But immediately I could look at it. It had a picture of like a dollar bill thing and said insert here. So, it took me about 5 seconds to realize, oh, they're accepting bills now. But for a person with disability, that's just probably not going to happen. You're going to have to train exactly to the task at hand, and it will be hard for them to generalize it to something else. I'll give you another example of my early days in teaching, and this seems so dumb to me now, but we had fake money, little plastic money, fake dollar bills and stuff, fake food, so, and a fake cash register. So we were going to go to the store, and we were practicing checking out, paying for your vegetables with this fake money with these plastic vegetables. And you probably know where I'm going to go. We went to the store, and they just stood there. We were like, well, you remember what a banana looks like, or whatever we were doing, and they're like, well, it didn't look like what they had been utilizing. So you have to use real things. You have to teach in real environments. You cannot assume that if you teach someone how to do something at the Marianos on Sheridan, that it's going to transfer over to the Jewel on Broadway. It just may not transfer over. So, this kind of notion that when we teach things, we want to build in as much generalization as possible, it's really important to keep that in mind. How do we build in as much generalization as possible? I mean, just a quick thing about the store. We even teaching categories like dairy, produce, bread, so that even if they can find the section of the store and they know how to read that and they can find it, then they may be able to go in and get the things that they need wherever they're shopping because they'll find produce, bakery, whatever I said before, dairy. They're going to find that in every store. So you might be able to teach that in that way, and then it's more generalizable. If you're going to teach people that it's 3 aisles this way and then turn left and halfway down the aisle is the cake mix, then forget it because it's not going to be that way in any other store. So you get the point. Generalizing is really, really important. So it needs to be put into your teaching practices. You need to think ahead about how you're going to be able to generalize or help students generalize the learning that they have so that they can be successful in not only in learning or taking on new tasks, but being able to engage effectively using the skills that they have in the most environments that they can. I think that's it. I welcome your feedback on the question that I gave you, the discussion question, because it's really about some of our terminology and things that we're looking at and facing in the way that we organize our thinking around developmental disabilities. So I'll be excited to read what you have there. Okay, thanks, and I'll see you next week.